Who's that? Oh, Nahant was just mentioned on the, on NPR,
Oh, really?
on my drive in here, yeah. And, there was audio from a Nahant, resident, yeah.
Okay, we are calling this meeting of the short-term rental committee to order at 7:04. We have all members present for physically and Marie on the Zoom. We presume that is her.
Yes, hi, I'm on Zoom, thank you.
Yeah, you are.
There you go. Let's move to reading of the minutes of the previous meeting. Does anyone have any concerns, omissions, deletions on the minutes of the previous meeting?
None here.
Hearing none, I'm going to entertain a motion to accept.
So moved.
Someone want to second that?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
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 Marie?
Hi,
Okay, votes unanimous. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so let me kind of start this meeting with, to give you some information that we didn't have when we left last meeting. Met with town administrator, chairman of the planning board, Dan Script, town council, and what was there? Oh, Gene Canty on the board of selectmen yesterday afternoon in this room. And was handed essentially a schedule. So in order for our recommendations and all the stuff that we've been working on to end up in front of town meeting and be appropriately work through the system, we need to have our work completed on or before Wednesday, February 15th. That is not far from now. After that time, the Board of Selectmen will give it to the planning board, who has to have a hearing. The hearing, they need notice time and so forth for the hearing. Then it needs to end up, we also have to, it's gonna end up in front of the Finance and Advisory Committee for recommendations, et cetera, et cetera. And then it has to get printed into the book for town meeting. So anyway, long story short, we don't have a lot of time to finish our business and get something on paper. So I printed up some portions of the existing zoning bylaw that are the things that we need to work on. So the actual language of the zoning, pieces of the zoning bylaw that we want to edit or add to are the most important pieces that for time. Because anything that involves zoning has to go through the planning board at some point before it gets to town hall. So at the end of the last meeting, we left off with should we or are we going to require a special permit for non-owner occupied STRs? I'm not sure that's where we're going to start. What place is that? Anyone want to jump in here?
Special permit for non-owner occupied.
All right, so, yeah, oh, that's right too, because John wasn't here last meeting. So let me give you the kind of from what you, the little bits that you missed. So we were discussing it last meeting. Who should be eligible to have a short-term rental and how we should go about it. A lot of communities are requiring a special permit for any short-term rental. I thought we all kind of agreed last meeting that was a bit much. Not only of that, but you know, it's probably not necessary. So what we kind of came to terms with was that we should allow occupied. Who was it? I don't want to confuse my terminology. When the occupant is present during, what do we call that? That was owner.
Or resident occupied, yeah.
Right. So let's call it owner occupied for lack of a better description, that those would be allowed as a matter of right. And then owner adjacent.
Once the owner has applied.
Well, yeah, right. I'm talking about, yeah.
Subject.
Let's still have everybody is subject to registration, inspection, blah, blah. But the point is, from a zoning perspective, that the owner occupied, someone who lives in a house and is renting out a couple of bedrooms, that should be allowed as a matter of right. Owner adjacent, I've got a 2-family or 3-family, and I want to rent out a unit that in a building that I otherwise also live in. That should be allowed as a matter of right. Non-owner occupied, an entity from God only knows where buys a property in Nahant and wants to use it as an Airbnb, that should require a special permit. That's what would be the distinction that I would like to see happen relative to who should be able to run and operate it. That's short-term rental. So that's what seemed to be the sticking point at the last meeting. At what point does someone need to end up in front of the ZBA?
The ability to issue special permits exists. And do we wish to recommend to town meeting that non-owner occupied short-term rental applications are eligible for a special permit?
Correct. It's pretty much the way the city of Salem is handling it. Other communities are requiring a special permit for everybody. Again, I didn't think that. I thought that was maybe a little overreach. One of the things that we discussed yesterday was that if we're going to require a special permit, then we have to establish criteria for that same special permit.
Right.
Our zoning bylaw already establishes criteria. I have it. It's in your stuff. I handed out. Now I'll read this section just so we have it. So anyone, people on that are listening can hear this. In granting a special permit, the special permit granting authority may impose special conditions after taking into account, among other considerations, the following. Protection of adjoining premises in the general neighborhood from any detrimental use of the lot or structure. Convenience and safety of vehicular and pedestrian movement within the area. Responsibility and adequacy of the methods of disposal of sewage, refuse, and other waste. Provisions for loading and unloading of vehicles incidental to the servicing of the buildings and related uses of the lot. Preservation of views and sunlight to adjoining and nearby properties. And with regard to business uses requiring a special permit prior to granting such permit, special permit granting authority shall make a finding that the proposed business use will not be detrimental to town and neighborhood in terms of health, welfare, and safety, and that no substantial environmental degradation will result from the granting of such permit, such as air or water pollution, visual or noise pollution, and vehicular traffic congestion, overcrowding or misuse of the land, or damage to irreplaceable natural and or historic resources. I mean, that pretty much covers anything you could possibly want to consider as far as, I think, things that someone would want to address when applying for a special permit.
Mr. Chairman, one other, in section 4.07, which is attached to the home-based business, which if you want to expand the use of the home for a home-based business, I think it goes, I can't remember the exact numbers, but I think it was expanding from 15% to 25% as far as a home-based business. That requires a special permit, and I think the comment that I like there as far as attached to that special permit process is that the Board of Appeals shall make a finding that the issuance of such a permit would not be detrimental to the residential nature of the neighborhood. I underscore residential nature. And I think that's really one of the most valuable points as far as having a special permit process, is that there would be someone go and take a look at this to make sure that the residential nature of the neighborhood is not going to be altered by the installing a short-term rental that is not owner occupied.
Right. So anyway, that was the issue, or an issue that was brought up yesterday's meeting, that if we're going to require a special permit, then we need to establish what those conditions would be. It's kind of pretty much already been done for us. It's already in our zoning bylaw. So I don't think we need to worry about making up anything new. It's already here.
And we've got plenty of other examples the town council provided us as far as
Yes, exactly.
Field and Clinton. I know Clinton's the same as Gardner. Let's see. North Adams just passed their ordinance end of December, and they also are requiring a special permit.
So again, I don't know if we want to address this directly right now, or we want to move as part of another group of items, but that's kind of like where we left off. As far as do we as a committee want to put in our package that's going to end up in front of the Board of Selectmen the requirement that a non-owner occupied short-term rental requires a special permit?
I certainly believe we should. I think, well, they've even asked us to update the table of use.
And that's in my list of stuff.
Yeah, so I mean, this would be a part.
Trying to take it like one
This would be-
section at a time.
This would be part of that.
Absolutely.
John, one thing you weren't here for, representing the planning board, they did come up with as they're calling it, a consensus preliminary recommendations of planning board of short-term housing issues.
You must have seen.
You should have a
that.
copy
It's
of that.
probably- Yeah, yeah,
Did you read that?
yeah.
Specifically, they stated, I could read you the beginning of it. Kind of a background and how they got to their conclusion. This specific topic, I will read the following. The PB, the planning board believes that an owners need not reside in the property during the short-term rental. You need not reside in the Nahant during part of or all of the year. However, the owner must appoint a nearby operator as detailed below, see issue 8. As long as the rules and regulations are clearly established and enforced by the owner in town, the necessity of an owner/occupied unit is alleviated. Any recommendation regarding enforcement is outside the scope of this document, but the planning board urged a robust enforcement mechanism with meaningful penalties.
So how does that square with what we were just discussing? Minutes ago. There's planning.
So, so their attitude is that they don't really care one way or another.
Right,
I take it that the planning board is not requiring a special permit for short-term rentals. That's how I read their recommendations.
They addressed it at all, did they?
Well, yeah, they did, but they
No, no.
did it in the planning board way. They left it with kind of a vague answer.
Did they say about special permits?
No, it doesn't specify,
That's
doesn't
my-
say the word special permit is not
That's-
ever
yeah.
listed
I
there.
they didn't address that piece at all.
Well, if they required it, it would be
That-
mentioned
yeah,
in
all
the
right.
Issue
recommendation.
4, who can qualify to receive a permit? I'm not gonna bore everybody and read this long document again, but they did, it was brought up, it was kicked around, and ultimately, again, as they stated here, any recommendation regarding enforcement is outside the scope of this document, but the planning board urged a robust enforcement mechanism with meaningful penalties. So pretty much, they said, you're gonna have rules, you're gonna have requirements to list, to even obtain a license, because, you know, through this process, we're creating a licensing board. I think it'll be the selectmen, but they said if you can meet the requirements that you need and you can follow the rules. If you go outside of the rules, you're gonna lose your license. If there's any complaints or anything in here, there's a strict enforcement penalty. So they said, if you're gonna play by the rules, meet all the requirements, we're gonna give you the opportunity. If you drop the ball, then you're gonna lose it.
Mr. Chairman, I didn't hear anything. I don't mean to split hairs, but I didn't hear anything with regard in that as far as special permit. The two coincide.
So my viewpoint is if the planning board was asking for a special permit, then it would be mentioned in their recommendations. Because they didn't mention it and they said that you don't need to be a resident, you don't need to live on the property. Then,
Didn't say you didn't have to be a resident. It said you didn't have to be there all the time.
right,
But
That's the difference between being there not all the time and never being there.
once again, I don't see the link to the special permit.
Steve, are you
Regardless
on the planning
I
board?
don't want to, I'm not sure if
Yes.
it's appropriate for me to speak about what was happened yesterday, but Chairman of the planning board did not express any objection to the concept of the special permit in a meeting that we had yesterday afternoon.
And really, it's. I think we just need to take a vote and get this settled. I have some recommendations here on how to do that. If you'd like. It's up to you.
Yeah, I guess. I'm not quite sure where we're headed. That's why I'm asking. I mean,
We don't have to do it now, but I'm just saying.
I kind of want to get this one item at a time here.
Okay.
If we're gonna,
Wayne, this is Tony. Do you want me to further explain the conversation that we had yesterday?
yeah, I guess so, sure.
I just don't want, I want folks to understand, that conversation is open and transparent. So I want everybody to understand the conversation we had. The purpose of that meeting was to first talk about the schedule, as you mentioned, and lay out what the process was. It was important that yourself, the Board of Selectmen, and the Planning Board were all on the same page, so that, because there are a lot of steps here, whatever the short-term rental committee recommends, should it trigger zoning, will require a planning board hearing and a recommendation from the planning board. Your recommended bylaw will go to the Board of Selectmen first. The Board of Selectmen will then send it to the planning board so they can go through their process. The Board of Selectmen will also send it to the Finance Advisory and Finance Committee, who will also, is required to submit a recommendation on all articles for town meeting. So there's a number of different items there and timelines that have to be met. So that was number one. I think that was really important that we met and talked about that, so everybody understood the urgency in order to, meet those deadlines and be prepared for the upcoming town meeting. And I thought that was a very productive conversation that we had. We then also talked a little bit about what would the article look like. There's a lot of different things that the short-term rental committee is reviewing. Some of it triggers zoning, some of it would not. So there's, we talked about, would it be one article? Would it be two separate articles? How would that look? And we didn't really get into much of, the specifics of the policy, or really talk about, which way the short-term rental committee will ultimately recommend. But we more talked about what are the things on the table and how would those look if they were to be included in a future bylaw, as far as an article or two at the upcoming town meeting. So we kind of split them into two different things. You have items in front of you guys that are related to the number of licenses, the number of days, noise, trash, safety and code, different types of elements like that. Those types of elements we kind of put in the bucket of a general bylaw because they would apply to everybody. If should the short-term rental committee decide to allow owner-occupied and non-owner occupied, regardless of by way of special permit or not, all of those short-term rentals would have to follow the same set of rules and procedure by which they would get a license from the town. And those types of things we kind of threw in the general bylaw bucket, right? The other part of it was the item that you're talking about right now. Would you allow owner occupied as of right, which, Wayne, correct me if I'm wrong, I felt like what I got from you and your committee was looking at the current zoning bylaw. The closest thing to short-term renters is lodgers and
Correct.
boarders,
Yes.
which is more of like an owner-occupied type format, and they are allowed as of right. So following the, setup or style of the current existing bylaws, leaning in that direction of as of right, owner occupied. The next part is the non-owner occupied, and you had mentioned that the committee was considering that too. And then we talked about, okay, so those questions kind of fall into a zoning amendment versus a general bylaw. So to go down that road, you're talking about amending the current zoning to A, as you mentioned, updating the table of use chart. B, clarifying the section that talks about roomers, boarders and lodgers, and clarifying that that does not apply to short-term rentals. 3, creating, a new section that makes it clear what does apply to short-term rentals. And then adding the, and 4, adding the special permit element for non-owner occupied. And what we talked about with that last piece was the importance of creating a process that would be a fair opportunity for property owners to apply for that special permit. So really kind of going a little bit beyond just what the impact to the residential neighborhood is, which would certainly be a part of that review process so that the neighborhood could voice their opinion. But going a little bit deeper, creating standards that really articulate the difference or the characteristics of that type of use that are eliminated once it's no longer meeting the definition of owner occupied. So essentially what you're trying to do is say, you know, owner occupied as of right, non-owner occupied is a different animal. Why is it different? What are the characteristics of that type of use that differ from owner occupied? And creating those, like identifying those and creating those as standards would give the ZBA, when eventually they get an application, a measuring tool to understand, you know, what is this use going to look like? How is it going to essentially provide the same characteristics that an owner occupied use would, even though it's not. So and then the last thing we talked about was, you know, needing a definition for that owner occupied language. So that's my summary of really what our discussion was. I just wanted to make sure I see a lot of people on the call that they, you know, understood what that discussion was about.
Thank you, Tony.
Thanks, Tony.
You're welcome.
So if we go back to, let's go back to section 4.06, the piece of our zoning bylaw that would appear to allow some activity to happen that even if we don't all agree on it. All right, so section 406 says that the renting of rooms in a dwelling unit for the use of not more than 2 roomers or lodgers who do not constitute a housekeeping unit separate from that of the resident family. Right, the word resident family is in that section of the bylaw. So you can't have a roomer or a lodger if you don't have a resident family. Right. Then it just doesn't exist. It doesn't happen. So if this is the section of the zoning bylaw that we're being told is kind of in a half-ass way, allowing the current rentals to occur, then it says right here that it's an accessory use to begin with. So you can't have an accessory use if you don't have a resident, if it's not a residential home and it's not owner occupied. So I think to even consider the concept of something being not owner occupied is outside the bylaw of anything that's allowable.
Well, certainly.
So it would have to have a special permit of some kind in order to exist.
Yeah, but this
We made it an allowable use. And again, I mean, I'm still torn on the accessory use part. I feel like and I know there's a lot of language out there that could go either way, but I feel like the use of the house is still residential. I don't think that the use would actually, in my opinion, I don't see how the use changes. I agree that the transient nature of a short-term rental is not, it's not the same exact thing as a family living there, in no way, shape, or form, but I just wouldn't. An accessory use to put a doctor's office in part of the house, I can see, that's a business, and one could argue this is a business, and it's a relative and meaningful argument. But it's not a business that's open to the public. It's not a business that has business hours. It's in all purposes the same exact use as a residential house, except there's a transfer of money. That really is what it boils down to. If there was no money transferred, this would be a sleepover.
Yeah,
I'm just looking for you.
I think there were
Trying to give you an
restrictions.
instance here.
See, I think this, maybe for Marie, for myself, probably the biggest question, we go the route of a special permit. Could somebody that meets all the qualifications be turned down from the zoning
I
board?
think I can answer that question.
If it could be done here, then it could be done in all the other cities and towns in Massachusetts that require the special permit. So I don't see where we're doing anything different by.
What do you guys see as the right passage here? Would you, because I think we could, and again, I think it would start to get away from the special permit. If we had a list of requirements that an individual had to meet in order to even move forward and attempt to obtain a license. That would be more of just a simple permitting process, if they check all the boxes.
Pretty much pay your fee and get the license.
No,
Well,
trash, parking, safety,
is,
egress, you know.
Follow the rules.
Well,
Yeah.
again, I spoke, and I guess you'd have to get an opinion from Dan on something like this, of this suggestion would be. Does an operator have to be a legal resident of the town of Nahant?
I think that's a great question. I think that we put a lot of thought into that.
Should that be a requirement? If I think that would go. It would go a long way in making me feel better about
What if we
not
did-
necessarily requiring a special permit. I would feel better if the people who might be running something in a property they don't live in, at least is a resident.
Would have a special permit for anybody that does not reside in Nahant. Full time.
But we've already heard it referenced that. If such an individual has a representative who is local.
That was the planning board's words.
Well, you're
Again,
gonna need that either
we're
way,
not the planning board, so
because even if you theoretically you have a house that you're renting out a couple of rooms, you're not gonna be there all the time. Right?
Right.
So even in that registration is gonna require a notification policy. Who we calling, who's the police calling if there's a problem? Every one of these registrations is gonna have to have an emergency contact information.
Sure, for a short-term rental.
Right, yes, absolutely.
Short-term.
So I mean, that
Who do you
part
call?
that doesn't change anything, I guess, in the sense of
Well,
who should we be worried about and who shouldn't we worry?
and
Because
don't-
obviously, if someone's from out of town or out of state that owns a property in Nahant, they're gonna have someone has to come in and clean the place. So there's gonna be a local contact somewhere.
we just don't have that. And we do not have the means to enforce that. Even if we did have.
I don't know what I mean. In what
If
can,
you own property, you do not reside in the property, in the town, or even in the state,
yeah,
or even in the country. There is no law anywhere that says that you must have somebody local in order to maintain the property.
if you're gonna run a short-term rental, that's why, this is where I'm going at. And I was certainly not gonna tell someone they can't own property in town or not, but if you wanna run this operation, then you should have one.
Excuse
That's the
me.
point.
That's what I
I
was
hate
saying.
to, I hate to interrupt, but this question has
Open.
been
Okay,
decided
we're-
by the appeals court. So just to be a little more helpful, in the fall, New Orleans handled this issue already. By the way, my name is Becky Delpy. I live on 124 Castle. New Orleans tried to outlaw short-term rental owners from out of New Orleans. The case was put to suit. It went up to the appeals court. The appeals court ruled that you could not discriminate against out-of-town owners. So I think some of these conversations might benefit from the advice of town council when you're kicking around these ideas. The issue or the big issue is, what is the cost to the town if you decide to discriminate against owners who don't live in the town or don't live in the property? And to date, I don't think there's been an assessment or an evaluation of the cost to the town if you follow down this road. Sorry to interrupt, but I thought it would be helpful to know that background.
Mr. Chair, I can
Orleans-
add something to that.
Go ahead, Dan.
First of all, do you have a site for that case, Graham? You said New Orleans. What's the exact site? If you have it, right?
I don't have the site handy, but I'd be happy to email it to you, Dan. It was pretty well publicized just in the fall of 2022.
Okay, I would be a bit surprised that it's that simple. I think there's probably more to it than that because we discriminate against out of town people all the time. Look at parking. We give citizens the right to park in town. And we don't give that right. So that's not a barrier. In fact, it's quite frequent that town residents are given the benefit of their own community ahead of out of town folks. That's not to say you're incorrect, but I'd have to look
I
into that.
think the holding was that whatever the determination was by New Orleans to restrict the owners violated interstate commerce. So I think that was the issue.
Right,
But
so-
I'd be happy to email that to you. I can dig it
Okay.
up.
Yeah.
All right, so that's easy enough to take the residency issue off the table because it was just a thought. But that doesn't address non-owner occupied. A non-owner occupied could be a resident.
Yeah, I think most of them are. I wouldn't want to say. That's one thing we don't
So
have
let's
as
go
much.
back, let's leave the residency issue out of it and go back to whether it's owner occupied or not. That was the original thrust of it. So let's forget the residency issue and go back to where we were. Non-owner occupied.
As I said, I think my biggest concern would be if somebody checks all the boxes and I think maybe there could be some sort of language, if they've had a short-term rental in the past and it has been problematic, then they don't just get their license handed to them, but let's assume an individual that has had no instances in the past, checks all the boxes for the requirements. Would there be an avenue for them to go to the zoning board of appeals and be denied? And if so, on what grounds? And that's an open-ended question. I think if we work
I don't
through
know
that,
how
I
that-
think we're
I
all
know-
on the same page.
Everybody needs a special permit in Linfield. I don't know what criteria they use.
And
You can't have a
Rob, is that
Airbnb in Linfield
One
without a
district
special
in
permit.
Linfield, that's what, the R1.
residential district, yeah,
It's only allowed in the residential district and it requires a special permit.
right.
That's how they handled it. Everyone needs a special permit, owner occupied or other.
I think they only said in the residential district, you need a special permit. That was where that was.
Because it's not allowed anywhere else. It's only allowed in the residential district. Don't turn it around like it's allowed somewhere else. It's not allowed anywhere else. It's only allowed in the residential district and you need a special permit. I thought we were being nice by saying if it's owner occupied, you don't need to do that. I was relaxing the rule,
I'd be more than.
not making it more strict.
I think the only thing
I
that's,
thought I was given a concession. I mean, I would be perfectly happy if everybody needs a special permit. It wouldn't bother me one bit.
owner occupied makes up about 5% of the units in town, so it would be an effective ban on 95%.
I don't see it as a ban. I don't see how it could possibly be a ban.
They would lose the right, though. They wouldn't. You would not have the right until you got the special permit, and I think the big question here is.
That's not true. That's not true. That's not true. Chapter 334, whatever it is, that was the enabled. The regulation of short-term rentals contains a provisional license that can be issued while you're going through the process of getting your full license. You can get it, we could set it up to have a provisional license.
So if you do that, what's the point of the special permit then?
While
Right.
it goes through the special permit process. If it doesn't pass the special permit process, then you don't get the license.
And that's my question. What would grounds to not pass that?
Well, yeah, first thing we said, we are pointing to, at least the first thing that I point to is that I want a finding that is not going to be detrimental to the residential nature of the neighborhood. Let's start there. Are there any issues as far as safety concerned? I mean, we've got sections of town that are, the buildings are 10 feet apart. Is that going to be an issue? No, none of this comes into play if you in what we're talking about here as far as the sign and drive thing, where you pay your fee, sign a form, and you're in business as long as you got the app. So to me, you need somebody that's going to be able to go out there and assess this and say, is this a good fit for the neighborhood? Is this going to work? And quite honestly, it also gives the neighbors a chance to come in there to the hearing and say, we think it'll work because of this, or we don't think it'll work because of this, but everybody gets a say on this. That's, and like we've pointed out, so many cities and towns in Massachusetts are doing this. You can't say for a minute that everybody stopped signing these things up just because their city or town came up with a special permit requirement. They're obviously doing it. And I don't know why Nahant should be held out as different.
Yeah, there certainly are towns this town's doing both, and there's towns doing nothing at all, and I think,
Well,
you know,
there's-
we're not every other
There's
town.
we addressed, I read off a list of stuff, last meeting. There's many communities that this is.
There it is.
Excuse me. Owner occupied uses only. And anything else other than that is completely banned, no with special permit available. Right,
And
so again, I think we're being more than agreeable to say, you can, if it's owner occupied, you can do it as a matter of right, and if you're not owner occupied, you need the special permit. I don't understand why that's being so bad. I don't, if anything, we're being easy.
Wayne, this is Tony again. I'm gonna intervene a little just because I wanna try and help you guys make some progress tonight. And it seems I'm hearing both sides. I think let me lay out a little roadmap and you guys can take it from there. I think you should first start by defining owner occupied. Have an agreement on what the definition of owner occupied is. That's where you start. Number two, then you go from what Rob is saying is under the special permit, you want to, one of the important things that he wants to hear about is it detrimental to the neighborhood? That could be one of your standards for the ZBA to review when someone's applying. I assume there will be more. I think what you're gonna do, I think what you wanna do is you wanna understand if owner occupied, whatever that definition is gonna be done as of right. And non-owner occupied is gonna go through a special permit process. What are the elements of the non-owner occupied setup that are different from an owner occupied setup? And those elements are going to help guide you to develop what those standards are for the ZBA as they evaluate an application. In other words, if you are okay with owner occupied being as of right, set up standards for the special permit that are going to make a non-owner occupied format walk, talk, and look like an owner occupied. So how, if those are, if the short-term rental committee is okay with owner occupied being as of right, set up standards for non-owner occupied that are going to essentially get that non-owner occupied to perform like an owner occupied. But I think you need a definition to start from, because
We have definitions, we've had them
so
for
what
months.
is what's the definition of owner occupied that you guys are all
Owner
working?
Okay, I'll give it to you. Operator occupied short-term rental of a dwelling unit of no more than the number of lawful bedrooms within such dwelling unit that is the primary residence of its operator.
So primary residence, does that mean 176 days of the year?
We didn't get into the number of days. We're saying that number of days is unenforceable. I know a lot of cities and towns have put that in as far as indicating that this is the primary residence, but we haven't.
We could change primary to legal, and then there's a definition for that. Can only have one legal residence.
Right, and that's what I was getting at, is because I know there's a lot of Nahant residents that their primary might be down in Florida because they spend half the time down there and half the time up here.
Right, so then there would be a non-owner occupied unit if that was the case.
Okay, so,
Well, what if they rent only when they're in Nahant? So I like the legal owner of the property or legal resident. So that if, let's say you're a snowbird, right? And you spend 5 months in Florida or somewhere else, and then the rest of the year in Nahant, but you only rent when you're in Nahant. So then it's still owner occupied short-term rental, right? So it
Go
doesn't,
ahead.
mean it just became non-resident. So maybe a legal resident is a better term for it.
That's certainly doable. I mean, we can change these definitions to whatever we want them to say. But
But what
we
you're
have
trying to get
definitions for
to-
these different items. It's not like we don't have the definition. I think we sitting around this table, we all understand what an owner occupied unit is and what a non-owner.
well, that's why I
don't think this
suggest,
is-
I think that's important that you start there, because that's gonna tell you, you know, what concerns do you have for a non-owner occupied? If that concern is, well, because I don't want, you know, someone who is never in Nahant just renting out a property, well, then that should be a standard that you might consider as part of the special permit, is someone who has, you know, some sort of tie to the town, or, you know, not necessarily that they have to be a resident. Maybe that is another standard. Maybe that adds another point of emphasis for the ZBA to consider. So that's what I'm trying to say is, if you're okay with owner occupied, but non-owner occupied needs to go down another road, what is the difference between those two? And take those differences and create standards for the short term, for the special permit process. If that makes, am I making sense?
I think you are, but
I think that there might be another step to it though, Tony. I mean, I talked a few minutes ago about, you know, assessing the neighborhood is obviously as far as the residential nature. And I think the comparison there is that in an owner occupied, a resident owner occupied building, that's a resident family. That house is operating the same as any other house in the neighborhood. People in and out of it all the time. That fits nicely within a single family residential zone district. Now we take a house that is unoccupied, probably 50% of the time, has people wheeling in their luggage every weekend, whatever. That's a whole lot more like a hotel room. So that, in the minds of many, is outside of the single family residential neighborhood. That's not something you expect to find there. Or at least if that's where you've always lived, all of a sudden now you have basically the equivalent of a full-time business next door. So the family occupied residential home, even though it's renting out rooms, is still more akin to the residential district. The other piece, obviously.
Well, wheeling new guests coming in, however frequently you want to explain it, could occur in both those scenarios, right?
Exactly, yes, but in the first situation, the occupied, the resident family is there. That's just like any other home. You've got people that are living and working there. That's where they live. And so the difference is, it's like a halfway point between the hotel room and the single family residence. It's not the full jump over to the hotel room yet. And that's why I think you see it a lot as far as other cities and towns like Boston requiring that there be a resident family, although they do it as far as the number of days that they have to be there. I think it's 270 days or something along those lines. New York City right now is switching over to this because it got out of hand. They're going back to resident owner occupied. And we see this in cities and towns. And yeah, the escape clause, as William pointed out over in, I think it was Salem, where they allow them to be away for a number of days, which is taking care of the snowbirds and stuff like that. But the primary use, and that's what we're talking about here, the principal use of that property is as a residential, full-time residential family. And then the accessory use of that property is now basically bringing in lodgers.
Right, so, and that's why what I understand is that's kind of where your comfort lies with it being as of right. Because
Yes,
it's owner occupied.
that's a commonly accepted thing. You know, I mean, even Nahant has wrestled with bed and breakfasts over the years.
So in non-owner occupied, well, again, first of all, I guess it depends. Again, I go back to what's your definition of owner occupied, because if owner occupied is just primary residence and the owner isn't really there, then that doesn't really fit the scenario you just described, right? What you're talking about is owner occupied being defined as the people who live there are there throughout the year, 365 days a year, right? That's the scenario you just described.
Yes.
So
like I
is that
said,
the definition is that the definition you're working off of?
We haven't put days into it, brought days into the discussion, because again, it's difficult to enforce, and that's what other cities and towns are running into.
Yeah.
But the bottom line is that they're trying to maintain that this is the primary home of the owner, and they are there most of the time, whatever that might be, whatever is acceptable to that city or town.
So when you're talking about non-owner occupied, which means the people who own the property are there less often than whatever the definition of owner occupied is.
Well, I think we're talking about not at all. It's certainly not the principal residence, and they're not getting their mail there. They're not there paying the bills. Their clothing isn't in the bureaus and in the closets and stuff like that.
So aside from them not physically being there, what are the other characteristics of that setup that are concerning? So because they're not there, the concern is what?
I think they never get to meet their tenants. I should let's not use the word tenants, guests. So much of this is done electronically now. We start with that. You know, I think one of the comments in the planning board's consensus was that people need to be able to choose good guests to make sure that there aren't any problems. But the bottom line is that they never really meet them in many cases, because it's all done electronically. They have electronic locks on the door. People go in, they go out, and the money gets exchanged, and that's the end of the story for that. So you start off with that one, and that's a big criteria if you never see these people. I know we want to rely on what Airbnb is saying or VRBO is saying. You know, this person gets 4 stars, 5 stars, whatever that might be. But they don't guarantee anything. They say they might look into it, but right in their own user agreement, they don't guarantee they're going to look at these people.
I feel like it's more of the host though than the guest. And I'll point to the example. The most problematic short-term rental that I've known of in this town was owner occupied. And that situation is got a wide open door to continue. I'd be willing to bet if the people that live next door to that house are on this call right now, they're probably scratching their head. I really think it comes down to the host. I think you can get a bad guest that's a bad guest to the naked eye. You can get a bad guest that hides as a good guest. And you can get some good guests, but I think that's up to the host to operate this. And back to the owner occupied thing. I don't see the public input on if somebody's property is empty some of the time. I don't think the neighbors are ever looking at the house with no lights on and saying, you know, this is really terrible. But maybe these short-term rentals, maybe they have a seasonal license. I don't think anybody's going to oppose it. There's not much of a desire to be here in the winter. So the person staying there in the winter months could be a 6-month tenant. They're not the registered owner of the property. I don't really know. Again, back to the fact of, you know, you could get a good person regardless if they own the property or not, but I don't know if that changes you guys' feelings on this. Maybe they're rented over the winter long-term, and then there's a family there going to work and having dinner and not carrying suitcases.
Is there room for some input here?
Can we,
Okay, hold on for a minute.
All right.
Let's. Yeah, let's.
Well, what I was,
hold the
what I was
conversation.
trying to get to with Rob there was, you know, like, if for what you, where the road we were just kind of going down, an example would be if somebody lived in Nahant and owned another property in Nahant and short-term rented it, they have just as much of a likelihood of meeting the people that they're renting to as the person that is living in that house X amount of days, or is there present X, depending on the definition again, X amount of days under that roof. So that would be an example of a potential standard that would be included in what the ZBA would, you know, measure when reviewing an application. And those standards, not according to, you can ask Dan, not every single one of those standards have to be met. They're all looked at individually. But it could be one of the elements. So Rob, what I was doing there by asking you those questions was trying to kind of get you to think about what those standards might be that you would want to have in place so that the non-owner occupied property, you know, presents itself a little bit more like an owner occupied property, if I'm making sense.
I understand what you're trying to get to, Tony, and I agree that there are features that we can explore in that regard, but the bottom line is that you can't take in the impact to a neighborhood that one of these non-occupied houses might represent by looking at the application form and taking their fee. The neighbors, they can be contacted, say this person is doing this to this house. They might give some input, but you know what? They paid the fee and they filled out the form and they say they'll follow all the rules. So the neighbors really don't have a lot to say about it. From a safety standpoint, like I said, you know, these.
Well, they
I
would
haven't
in a
seen-
special permit. They would have.
In a
say.
special permit, they would, yes.
Yeah, so that's what I'm talking about. Is
Yeah,
in
and
that
that-
special permit, what you need to do is you need to set those standards. You need to figure, you got to give the ZBA some sort of measuring stick to analyze these applications that come in. It's got to go a little bit beyond just residential impact, because otherwise, you know how that's going to end up, and you got to give the property owner some fair share. So you got to guide the ZBA, and these are the important things that we feel are important when you're looking at a non-owner occupied. These are the items that are important that you need to review when reviewing an application. Those non-owner occupied would have to go and get that special permit. If they got it, then they could apply for a license from the town. But they can't apply for a license from the town without the special permit. The owner occupied, you're right, they would just apply for the permit. There'd be a set of rules, you know, that would apply to everybody, that would have to be checked off, the inspections and all that stuff. But the non-owner occupied, you got to give the ZBA some sort of measuring stick of, you know, what's the information we want to know before we decide whether we're going to allow this use. Right? And to me, if you're saying you're okay with owner occupied as of right, but it becomes a different animal when it's non-owner occupied, you got to figure out what are those differences, and then that will help you determine what the standards are, because if they meet those standards, then maybe it's not as much of a different animal, and maybe they are okay with getting a special permit.
So let me, I want to ask a question of Dan.
Yep.
Dan, you can hear us, right?
I can, yep.
All right, so do we alleviate the, any possible legal issues by just requiring everybody to get a special permit as opposed to only the non-owner occupied?
I don't think that goes a long way to making that happen. There is no issue with regard to putting a category of short-term renter hosts to be in the category of special permit versus as of right. That's clearly a matter of law. That's not an issue. I will look into this case from out of it's out of New Orleans, not Orleans, Massachusetts, to see what it says. But as Tony mentioned, if the question is, what are your links to Nahant? Well, that alleviates the residential issue. But dividing a group between special permit versus non-special permit is not a big issue because it's giving everyone a chance to prove their case as opposed to just outright banning it. If we outright banned it, that would be a bigger problem. But with a special permit, you're providing an avenue. So, okay, let's see what you got. Show us why this isn't going to be a problem. And that is fair.
Yeah, just to give you a little bit more on that New Orleans, the 5th U.S. District Circuit Court of Appeals gave the ruling back in August 2022. Key provision of the law says that a person can get a short-term rental. I should say a key provision of the law that New Orleans had passed said that a person can get a short-term rental license only for their primary residence, a residence for which they claim a Louisiana homestead property tax exemption. The 5th U.S. Circuit Court of Appeals ruled against that. Let's see. Yeah, provision unconstitutionally restricts interstate commerce.
Well, we're not even talking about homesteads here. That's not even an issue. So this might be factually
No,
different.
they were using the homestead requirement as a means of documenting whether or not they actually live, that was their primary residence.
Yeah, well, again, I got to take a look at that case. I want to dig a bit more deeper in it, but I don't think we're really looking at saying you're a resident or you're not a resident as the delineating point. So I'm not even quite sure that case comes into play here, but I will take a look at it to make sure I got it right.
Texas has a state decision, the same thing.
Okay.
Rob, can you send that case to the generic email for the short-term committee? I'd like to read it too. Thanks.
Sure.
All right.
I think I can send it from here if you guys want.
Whatever you, yeah, sure, if you can, go ahead. All right, that's,
Yeah, perfect.
unfortunately, we're not moving forward again. We're stalling out on this special permit requirement issue.
I think we're all on the same page. I think we don't want this to be a bother at the end of the day. And we don't want anybody to feel like they haven't had a voice. I'm certain there's a number of people that just aren't on Facebook and probably don't even know we're here tonight that might have an opinion on this one way or another. So I think our job is to speak for those who aren't speaking or haven't been here. And if this allows in any capacity, it will, if this persists in any capacity, it'll persist in a way that, as Rob has stated, is not going to be detrimental to the neighborhood. Again, the one problematic one we had was owner occupied. I think it really comes down to the hope. Rob, you've referred to this as a business, you know, in some ways it is. I think if you want this business to succeed, you're going to take measures to make it succeed. And if you don't, well, last year, there was no repercussion. You know, the neighbors could call and complain all they want. But I think with the rules and regulations that we're probably going to have, we're going to eliminate that. And I would just say, kind of walk before we run, you know, put some rules, regulations in place. If a short-term, if a special permit is one of those things we want, fine. I just think we ought to spend a little bit of time on defining. You know, we're not, it sounds like we're torn on the definition of owner occupied. I think there's a lot of parameters in that special permit. Rob, you made a great point. There's some houses that are 10 feet apart. There's probably some that are 5. But if a house is 5 feet apart, should they not get a permit? And then anybody else, should they go out in the yard before they apply and measure to the house next to them? You know, I don't, and I don't know who here has been to a zoning board of appeals hearing. You know, you got one side and you get the other, and one side is going to prevail and one side is going to lose, and you're just putting people against one another. I think what our objective here is to do is to make this, if it continues in any capacity, to allow it to continue in a harmonious way with the town, And if it can't continue, then it can't, you know, if this is something that is just that outright egregious to the town, then. You know, it shouldn't be allowed in any capacity, but I just think taking the people and having them argue with each other and some win and some lose. You know, I don't know, I would say put rules and regulations in place and put a Cinderella period on it, a 1 year, you know. And revisit it and say, okay, is this working? Is it not working? We've gone 12 years without anything. We've gotten it right here, right now.
Right, but I don't, what I would be afraid of with that approach is that if we just say, okay, everybody knock yourself out, go ahead. Then to try to, you know, pull the herd back into the corral after it's out, it's gonna be almost impossible.
And you can flip it just the opposite way and say, okay, well, let's put it in now, and if you want to revoke it
I
after a year.
don't have a problem with that.
You're not gonna get pushback on
I
it.
would rather be more restrictive to start with and then relax the rule than to go try to do the opposite. I mean, it doesn't make any sense to be lenient and then try to rein it in after the fact.
No, you
Because
make
then you're gonna get into the, well, you let me do it before, now I'm grandfathered in or some nonsense like that. And I don't wanna fight that battle.
Do you think that should come in form of rules and regulations, and maybe the rules and regulations are overboard? Maybe there's a one strike, you know, to an actual complaint that's a whole nother subsection we have to work out, but. If somebody makes a complaint, it's deemed true and correct, they lose their license immediately. That way, at least nobody is stopped.
I don't see that holding up.
My only thought is, how, if, again, hypothetically, if someone goes to a zoning board of appeals and the neighbor says, my house is 17 centimeters away from them. We don't know how that host is gonna operate. We don't know how that host is gonna run the business. It could be successful, it could be an absolute failure, but we're drafting the ZBA with the task to make a determination on a completely hypothetical situation. You know, someone's gonna have to go there and say, it's gonna be really noisy. In the zoning board of appeals, if they see it true, you know, if they see that the possibility that it's going to be noisy is detrimental to the neighborhood, that person's not gonna get the permit.
But that's, the zoning board of appeals makes those kind of decisions all the time.
That's exactly what you passed out as far as what currently exists.
How? In what other application do they do that?
Well,
In every application,
again, like, I
But
already,
they would never say, you wanna go 7 feet for your side setback, the minimum's 10. You know, and the neighbor shows up and says, listen, you know, it's a residential neighborhood and I want my peace and quiet. And I want to see someone sleeping there 365 days a year. The zoning board of appeals would look at them and say, what? You know,
no, but I'm saying.
how is
The
this?
zoning board of appeals makes decisions based on a lot of criteria on a regular basis. Why would this be any different than any other way that they make decisions?
Because it's a completely hypothetical. Normally they get a plan in front of them. They can see the building is gonna go right here. And this is, you know, this is the height of it, this is the size of it, this is the setback. This. Any issue, there's cases out there, you know, there have been problems with these, but any issue with any individual property. Is completely hypothetical, and in my opinion, if the zoning board rules against one of them, they have to rule against all of them. If they find this detrimental to one neighborhood, it's detrimental. The end.
No.
so I've already read this, I'm gonna have to read it again, it's 4.07 as far as the home-based business expansion. The Board of Appeals shall make a finding that the issuance of such a permit would not be detrimental to the residential nature of the neighborhood. What's ironclad about that?
Mr. Chair, this is not a home
Yes, go
occupation.
ahead.
This is not a home occupation. I know, Rob is sort of putting it in that category, but it's not, because if you look at the
I'm not
list of, let me just
No,
finish.
but it's still, that's,
I'm not calling it a home occupation, I'm just saying, by an example, that we currently have this in the bylaw.
Okay.
And it's exactly what Steve says it shouldn't be.
But it's
Guys,
not a
can
home
you let
occupation.
Dan finish his thought, please? I'd like to hear his thought.
It's not a home occupation, and I think to compare the two, you're really going down the wrong lane, because.
I'm not,
no.
I'm not.
Well,
I'm not
but then why
comparing
even
to-
bother
no,
citing that section?
I'm,
Why are you citing that section?
I'm saying that in this other example, we have this.
They're apples and
rule that
oranges.
is-
They're apples and oranges. They're not the same.
I'm not
thing.
talking about this as a home occupation.
Then why are
Dan,
you
I-
citing that section?
I am citing this particular sentence That's
In the
as far as
section that
what
talks about home
Yeah.
occupations, yeah.
the zoning, I'm giving the example that the zoning board's being asked to follow as far as just, is this a problem for the neighborhood?
Yeah, but those are home
That's all
In
I'm
other
doing.
words, if they use it, if they can use that criteria for this particular area, then it's no different than the criteria for what this special permit will be for.
Take those three sentences and put them anywhere else.
That's what they're there for.
You have a great point, but I interpret that if someone said, I want to be a dentist, and I'm by myself. And I'm gonna have a chair in my lower level and I'm gonna operate from 9 to 5, Monday through Wednesday. Versus I'm opening a hair salon with 15 chairs. Those are both home occupations. One of them is gonna be extremely differently detrimental to the neighborhood than the other. The short-term rentals, we've narrowed them down a funnel. That one should not be different than another. They should all, if they go by the rules and regulations, hopefully we're gonna complete. They should all be the same. So that's why some businesses in town are permitted, they're kind of archaic now, video stores and things like that. But back in the day, they said, okay, whoever was sitting in this lovely room said, okay, this is not detrimental to the town, we'll allow it. But any question marks, anything, that someone else could come up with, you have to go for a special permit. We're narrowing down what the use or what the occupancy will consist of in a short-term rental. And then we're also saying, go for a special permit. And again, I think the neighborhood weigh-in is great, but I would urge you guys, I don't mind going that route. I just think we gotta get a better set of stipulations down for the zoning board. I personally don't think, I don't even have to look at the section 9.08 in our bylaws. I don't know if you guys have read that word for word, but I don't think that's the vehicle to get us,
So as for me, and I mentioned this before, if we decide that the zoning board of appeals and special permit is the way to go for some short-term rentals, there needs to be clear and objective set of standards and criteria that folks will meet. This statement alone in the zoning board of appeals process is vague, it's subjective. What does this mean? I don't have criteria that I'll measure every single application the same way. Okay,
Right,
we
but-
need to take bias and subjectiveness out of the equation if we're actually not going to get sued for discrimination as a result of these hearings, right? So I think that's what Tony was actually alluding to. So if we think that this is the way to go, there needs to be clear and objective set of criteria, like almost like a checklist that folks check off. And if everything lines up, there is no way to deny those permits, regardless of who these applicants are.
So, Mr.
But
Chair,
Marie, right now, we haven't even been able to get that far because we can't decide on whether we're gonna require it or not. So
Mr. Chair,
We have to, if we don't decide to have a special permit, there's no need for this checklist. We're ahead of ourselves yet again. We're talking about stuff that may or may not happen. We haven't gotten that far.
so Mr. Chair, along those lines,
Decisions we have to make one decision before we can come to the next decision. Because every decision relies on the previous decision to be valid. So if we're gonna keep going around in circles on the special permit issue, we may as well not even talk about anything else. Because this is the issue. At least it is at this table. Might not be an issue with everyone that's on the screen, but it's an issue in this table. And we have to make some kind of decision on it. Deciding whether or not we're going to establish some criteria is irrelevant if we never make this decision one way or another.
Should we have a vote?
yeah, might I suggest, Wayne, along those lines, the first decision this board should consider was, is there a need or not a need, a desire for special permits? And if there is, then there is. The next step would be, okay, in the next meeting, the goal is to define what is a home or owner occupied. And then you come up with a definition and you meet that goal for that meeting. The next meeting would be, okay, now we know we want a special permit for non-owner occupied. We know we have an as of right for owner occupied. Now, for that meeting, let's talk about what the standards should be. So we divide it up like that. It's like a funnel. You have a lot of stuff going on, but you funnel it down to less and less and less to the point where you are right. You are at the point now where you are at the minutia. but you've already gone from the top down to the bottom. So that would start with a vote assessing whether there would be a need to have a special permit for a non-owner occupied short-term rental.
I agree 100%.
We'll make a motion, please.
If we could just pass those around. Looking at the second page.
So while you're looking at that, let me just point out, as a matter of procedure, if it really came to it, you could always rescind a vote. That might happen tonight. I don't suggest that, but I just wanted to know that that's an option. If later on down the line, you guys realize you've gone the wrong direction, you need to sort of back up. I doubt that'll happen, but you should know that that is an option.
Thanks, Dan.
Okay, go ahead, Rob. I'm not sure what.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, I move that this committee amend table 1, table of use regulations in the town zoning bylaw to include under zoning districts, description of use, single-family detached dwelling, that we add, provided that no such property shall be leased or rented for a period of 30 days or less unless specifically authorized by the Board of Appeals. That table will be amended under R1 to change from P, permitted use, to S, special permit required. Same change for District R2, same change for B1 and B2. We have a second.
I'll second the motion for the purposes of discussion. I'm reading what's here, and I'm not understanding how that doesn't change every house in town.
Yes.
How
I'm just the way I'm reading it. I'm a
Yeah,
little confused.
what's the designation for? Owner occupied or not owner occupied or?
well, in this case, we're saying that a special permit, if you're going to, unless specifically authorized by the Board of Appeals, if you're going to rent the property out in contradiction to no such property shall be leased or rented for a period of 30 days, then you have to have a special permit. That's where it begins. If you look at Linfield, they have the exact same language.
I think that's far too long down the line from where we are now. Mr.
One
Chair.
concern I have with this, if you have a month-to-month lease in the month of February, you're in violation of this.
Let's
Yeah,
not
we're gonna make it
let's not
28
split
days.
hairs here.
Make it 28 days.
Make it 28 days, guys, because if it's gonna become part of the zoning bylaws. we
I
need-
left it 30. I know Dan has recommended we change everything to 28, but I left it 30 because that's what we currently have as far as our draft. But yes, everything should go to 28.
I would, this is Tony, again, I'm not a member of the committee, but I would suggest that what you guys vote on tonight is in concept. Once you get in a majority agreement on concept, town council will help you draft it into language, and then later you guys can vote again to approve what the language is articulating what you agreed upon in concept.
I couldn't agree more, Tony, that this is way too definitive, way too minute of a vote at this juncture. It's too early for this. The vote should be special permit for.
If anything, we're about 3 months too late.
I love that you're making progress, but I would suggest that town council write up what you guys agree to in concept instead of voting on language right now.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. You want to get it right. You don't want to vote on language that may not pass the legal standard, okay? So let's.
You can amend this language at any point.
Well, it really does go, it's subject to approval by town council. And that's a given.
Well, no, if you vote in something, I have no
Okay.
right to say you can't do it.
All right.
But you just take the suggestion that you gotta widen this a little bit. You just gotta, again, the big stuff you vote first and you just work it down to like a funnel. Right, your language, Bob, you're 2/3 down the funnel. We're still at the top of the funnel, right? So it's got to be much simpler than that.
I feel like, Rob, what you're trying to do here is just put a vote out there to say, hey, should we pursue this special permit for non-owner occupied or not?
What I'm trying to do is end the discussion as far as the back and forth that we're having and just make a decision one way or the other.
No, I agree, yeah. So I thank you for this, but yeah, I see your
Okay,
nature.
so. Rob, if you could withdraw your motion,
I withdraw my motion, Mr.
I'm
Chairman.
gonna entertain the motion that. It is the intention of the committee. To require a special permit for non-owner occupied. Short-term rentals.
That could be it. That could be the vote right there.
Second.
Discussions. Like we haven't had enough.
I don't. Dan, is it hot water to vote on this without?
So
Because we kind of, well, we don't know really what we're voting on. I mean.
yeah, exactly what I just said.
Just the motion.
Is it the intention of the committee to require a special permit for non-owner occupied short-term rentals? It's a very simple question. And it's a yes or no answer.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
That it is the intention of this committee to require special permit for non-owner occupied short-term rentals.
And Wayne, you're saying you're saying, I think what you're saying is, I move that this committee find that it is the intention of this committee to determine that non-owner occupied short-term rentals require a special permit.
Correct.
Okay, yes, great.
Okay.
Someone want to call a question?
Call the question.
Roll call. Marie?
I'm against it.
One no. Steve?
No.
Rob?
Yes.
John?
Yes.
I vote yes. Passes 3-2.
Great. Might I suggest that the goal of next meeting is to define what a owner occupied short-term rental is. So we can all be ready for that as a primary focus for next time.
What was the question again, Dan?
How do we define
Owner-occupied.
an owner occupied?
We
Before,
have a definition. I just already read this definition.
before suggesting waiting for the next meeting, they're making some progress here, unless they're eager to get off the call. You know, they
No.
just,
I want to get something done.
yeah, keep going. So keep going. So, the next, what Dan's saying, the next part of the funnel, it could either be the discussion of what the standards are for that special permit, or what the definition for owner occupied is.
Okay,
Stick
Rob.
to one of those
Like
topics.
me, am I looking at our draft?
Start with first, yeah.
Okay, so our working draft of all our rules and regulations is in my hand. The definition section says owner occupied, I read this, owner occupied short-term rental of a dwelling unit. Or of no more than the number of lawful bedrooms within such dwelling unit that is the primary residence of its operator. I'm not sure I have to make it into its form of motion. Does anyone want to change that?
No, I think that's.
Is that not an adequate definition of an owner occupied?
I think that's been served.
Exactly.
I think it's okay with me, so I have no additions to this.
So we've just defined what an owner occupied unit is.
So do we have to take a vote on this, Wayne, or?
Yes.
just-
Yeah,
We've already,
So-
we have, what you have there was decided by consensus.
We never voted on anything though, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm gonna read another definition. Owner adjacent unit, a residential unit offered as a short-term rental, which is not the owner's primary residence, but is located within the same dwelling as the primary residence, and it's owned by said owner, provided that owner adjacent units used as short-term rental shall be only allowed in two-family dwellings where both units are owned by the same owner occupant who serves as the operator. It's a lot of language in there, but
That seems restrictive to two.
we'd be
two
happy
unit
to
dwellings.
amend that,
I would look at owner occupied dwelling, period.
but not restrict the number of units.
Correct. Because we're looking for owner occupied.
I agree,
And
I'm
owner
not, I'm just reading the definitions
Sure.
that we have
I get that.
previously written in.
Yeah, I'm just finding an objection to the restriction to a two
So
unit.
we don't want to restrict it in any fashion?
Yeah,
3, 4, I don't know, I'm
Yeah.
just, that's why I'm asking.
I think you see that language a lot, in my opinion. So someone's not buying a 60-unit building in Boston and saying, yeah, I live here, and they essentially open a hotel. We don't have that problem here, so.
No, I agree with that. If the owner lives in the building, then there is no concern really. Regardless whether there are 2 units, 3 units, 5 units, I don't,
So do we want to eliminate okay, so because it says here shall only be allowed in 2-family dwellings, so we want to eliminate that.
yeah, I would eliminate it.
Yeah, you want to take a look at that?
And it was owned by said owner, provided that owner adjacent units used for short-term rentals only be allowed. So I'm reading rentals shall only be allowed in. And if I strike out 2-family,
No, start with rental, the start of that sentence.
okay, provided that owner adjacent units used as short-term rentals. Shall only be allowed in 2-family dwellings.
So we're beginning of the sentence.
Are owned by, so the whole sentence?
Yeah, the
Straight.
whole the purpose of the whole sentence is to get to the end, which is restricting it to 2-unit dwellings.
Oh, okay, I think you're spot on. So we would read a residential unit offered as a short-term rental, which is not the owner's primary residence, but which is located within the same dwelling as the primary residence, period.
Period.
Period. Okay. Done.
All right, do we need to vote on that?
I'll make
Or
a
do we
motion for
want-
what, the 2 definitions?
Yeah, sure.
I'll make a motion. That we. Approve the definition, I'll read it again.
Okay, go ahead, read them one more
I
time.
like reading.
That we adopt,
I'll make a motion that we adopt the following definitions. Operated occupied short-term rental defined as such, the short-term rental of a dwelling unit of no more than the number of lawful bedrooms. Within such dwelling unit that is the primary residence of its operator. And the second definition is owner adjacent unit defined as a residential unit offered as a short-term rental unit. Which is not the owner's primary residence, but which is located within the same dwelling as the primary residence. Period.
good,
Question,
Sure.
same dwelling, well, in my
Yes.
case, the same property or same building?
no,
Dwelling is building,
Okay, why not property?
that's a good question, yeah, because you have a
Well, yeah,
different situation than most.
and
All right,
I think that's common language too. I would think, a residential unit offered as short-term rental, which is not the owner's primary residence, but which is located within the same dwelling.
It's
as the
my-
primary residence
it's
or
still
parcel of land.
primary
Yeah.
residence.
Salem actually addresses it directly, but yeah, it's as long as it's on the same parcel, same, the same lot.
Right, so how does this sound? A residential unit offered as a short-term rental, which is not the owner's primary residence, but which is located within the same dwelling. Or parcel as the primary residence, just or parcel? Does that sound
I might
right?
say and or.
And or.
And or parcel?
yeah,
Right. And. Slash or parcel. Okay, so I'll reread the second definition. Owner adjacent unit, a residential unit offered as a short-term rental, which is not the owner's primary residence. But which is located within the same dwelling and or parcel as the primary residence. Period.
Yeah, that works.
did
Did
you put
everybody
that into a
understand
motion?
that?
Yes,
I
I did.
did, yes.
Second,
Yes, that's a motion. Stan
And
second.
the second.
I second, yeah.
Okay, let's do a roll call vote. Marie,
Yes,
Steve,
Yes.
John,
Yes,
Rob,
Yes,
and I vote yes.
So we'll just mark this for you.
Go ahead. Thank you.
I'm gonna put an asterisk next to
Okay,
this.
so now, obviously,
This.
we've been told multiple times that we have to develop some criteria for this special permit. I'm gonna, obviously, that's not gonna happen in the next 5 minutes, so we have section. I know I lost the number. We have what is already written in our zoning bylaw relative
908,
to getting a special permit.
908.
So do
908.
we really want to establish a whole separate criteria for that? Or do we want to embellish what we have existing?
I think the existing criteria are for a different purpose. They're vague, they're not objective. I really think that we need to kind of follow what Tony was referring to and kind of get along with what is the purpose of the special permit? What are the key elements? What people need to satisfy and so forth. Maybe we can take some time before the next meeting, think it through and come up with some ideas. What do you guys think?
So that should be the first topic of discussion at our next meeting, the
Yep.
And before you go, I'll
Special-
just read off some of the ones that I jotted down during our conversation yesterday.
go ahead.
Number one, impact to the neighborhood. So some sort of language similar to what you found in that other section. But number one, what's the impact to the neighborhood? Two, experience as a short-term renter. Who the applicant, what is their experience? Is it their first time operating a short-term rental, or have they been doing it for many years? Three, tie to the community. So again, you can expand on that, whether it's, do they currently live here? Do they used to live here? Do their family live here? Do they live right next door? Are they, do they work in town? What sort of, sense of tie to the community do they have? Because that will get you to maybe some of that comfort that they are invested in not negatively impacting the town. Parking was one that we talked about too, was making sure that they, are going to be offering off-street parking. And then parking, you don't have to get too specific there, because the way that we talked about it yesterday, you're going to get a little bit more specific in the general bylaws later on, which would apply to everybody, as far as parking goes. If you're going to say, whether it's owner occupied or non-owner occupied, you're only allowed to bring as many cars as you have off-street parking available. That can be done in the general bylaw. You don't have to put it here. Here, you might simply want to say, is there off-street parking available? Because certainly that could be some sort of detrimental neighborhood impact. Do they have a property manager? So if they don't live in the town, if it's not their primary residence, do they have somebody that's available to respond to any issues in a timely fashion? That was another thing you had mentioned.
A lot of this, sorry to interrupt you, sir. A lot of this too, we might be able to steal some language from the planning boards.
Yeah, we've
Right.
got this language all over.
They have,
But this particular language we're talking about is the criteria for the special permit. We've already discussed a lot of this language relative to the issuance of the license.
And
So,
what
I mean, it's
Dan had
kind of
said-
covers the same bases.
What Dan had said in our meeting was, you don't necessarily have to, say like, must have 2 off-street parking. In this short-term rental, in this special permit standard, you might just say, is there off-street parking available? And then it's the ZBA's role to evaluate, what that off-street parking is in relation to the size of the house and that sort of thing. You don't have to be super specific on these standards. Is that right, Dan? You basically want to set up a measuring tool for the ZBA to consider when they're reviewing an application.
That's right. That's right.
I don't see this as a list of standards as much as a reasonable list of considerations.
Whichever way you want to refer to them as. I think the
Same.
important part was that you go beyond just. Now, number one is neighborhood impact and hearing from the residents. You want to give the neighborhood that are adjacent to that property the ability to come in and talk about, what concerns they may have and or support they might have. You might have a lot of neighbors that come in and support it. You might have a lot that come in that don't, but certainly that would be your number one. But you want to go beyond just that so that the ZBA isn't put in a position to just pick and choose yes or no based on whether people show up to the meeting and raise a concern or raise an element of support. You want to give them a little bit more to investigate. That's where they're where your guidance will be helpful to them.
Thank you, Tony. I think I'd like to get a couple more things done before we leave tonight. All right, so like I said, the most pressing issues are what changes or amendments or additions to the zoning bylaws that we need to make or want to make. And I had made some of my own notes and so one of the other things that we need to tweak, because section 4.06 is the vague section of our zoning bylaw that may or may not allow short-term rental to exist to begin with. So it needs to be tweaked by adding a line there that no such rental shall be for a period of 30 days or less.
Which would be 28 if we're going with.
Okay, we can use the 28 number and I'm not gonna lose any sleep.
28
over
days
what
or
number we
more.
use. No such rental shall be a period of 28 days or less. That means it has to be more. Right, you can write it up in both directions if you want, but that's the line in that.
Well, then you'd be saying that someone renting a bedroom in their house can only do it on a long-term basis.
Yeah, that's a roomer or a lodger. Otherwise, it's a short-term rental. That's why we have to differentiate between what's a short-term rental and what's currently allowed as a roomer or a lodger.
This is just showing a difference between the
We
two.
need to specify the difference between what our current zoning bylaw allows as a matter of right
Mhm.
to rent to roomers or lodges, two unrelated people, no more,
Mhm.
right? That we currently have,
But
that
isn't,
doesn't specify a time frame.
this what is
This is what,
grandfathering in the existing owner occupied?
No.
Isn't this subsection?
not really,
We're,
because, no, it doesn't. I don't think it grandfathers anything in, but again, that's my own opinion.
no, it's taking out.
What I'm saying is it
This.
it takes away the vagueness of it, that what's a roomer or a lodger? And who's got the definition? Well, if the definition will be that you're there for more than 30 days or 20, take your pick, 28 days.
One being goes from day 1 to day 30, the other one from day 31 ad
Then we
infinitum.
add on the table of uses an owner occupied.
This is accessory. This is accessory now.
No, this is an accessory use to an
So
existing.
this is just
family
not to
house.
have the same use called two different things.
Exactly.
Pretty
Okay,
much,
Gotcha.
right?
I thought I'm thinking if we change this, then we're gonna retroactively
No,
cancel.
we're not.
Owner occupied.
No, we're not.
Yeah, this is what has been relied upon as far as short-term rentals in the Nahant. Now we're saying, take that out. We're putting this in, the short-term rental piece in.
Someone want to make that motion?
Mr. Chairman, I move that we amend section 4.06 renting of rooms to roomers of lodgers to add the following phrase: no such rental shall be for a period of 30 days or less.
Someone want to second that, please?
Should be 28 days.
28 days, guys.
You can do 28 days. We want to just start, yeah, We could start using 28 days.
Fine, use 28 days for everything.
Yeah.
And can,
We
you
get a
know,
sec-
as a housekeeping motion, can I just say, add one thing that has been bugging me since I saw this section? If you look at the title, there's a typo in it. It should say rumors or lodgers. So just add that to the motion so we can fix that. And that's fine. You can say so moved, it's fine.
Haven't heard the second yet, I don't believe.
Okay, fair enough.
Yeah, second.
Okay. Any other discussion on this? Marie,
No, I'm good.
I'll call a question then. Marie, you first, please.
Yes,
Steve,
Yes.
John,
Yes.
Rob,
Yes.
I vote yes. Motion carries. Okay, we have a table of required off-street parking. I know we just had that conversation, but we do have a table that needs to be amended. Our current table of required off-street parking has a line item called accessory lodging or lodging houses. And it requires one parking space per room offered for rent, not less than 1 or 2 beds. I just want to add to the line accessory lodgings or lodge housing or lodging houses and add short-term rentals to that line.
So moved.
So this is a zoning issue.
I'm sorry, Dan?
This is a zoning.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay,
It's the table of off-street parking.
I'm looking at it.
I don't want to make a separate rule for short-term rentals. I just want to add the word short-term rental to the existing line item of accessory lodging or lodging houses. 1 per room offered for rent, which is pretty much in line with what we were calling for.
So you want to add short-term rentals to that?
I want to just add short-term rental to that list.
Okay,
Yeah, in other words, add and short-term rentals to the accessory lodging or lodging house.
okay.
Any other discussion on that? Marie, discussion?
no issue.
What do you guys think?
4.12.
I misunderstood that.
6-1.
Table 6.1, table of
6-1.
required off-street parking. Just for the nature of carpooling. Many of these people are coming in 1 car. We're saying 1 parking space per bedroom. Dormitories jumps out right above, 2 parking spaces per 3 bedrooms, but I guess that would be kind of difficult to break down if.
Well, one, we don't have any dormitories, so kind of a moot point.
1 per room.
That's not 1 per room. Well, the dormitories one says
This-
1 per 2 per 3 beds, not rooms.
I'm looking at.
I'm,
one.
this. I
No,
think,
that's on the accessory lodging, right? One parking space per room offered for rent.
That's what we're considering.
That's what we've been talking about pretty much since the very beginning.
I
I
will,
just think that this is where it belongs in the table.
I will say a lot of conversation I heard. People, you know, they might have had 2 bedrooms and they only had 1 spot that they allowed, but. They made their guests, you know, they told their guests you have 1 off-street parking spot and that's it. You can fly here, you can walk here, you can drive here in 1 car. I think I wouldn't want to pass this and see anybody out there that has a well-functioning STR that is either owner occupied or not owner occupied to lose the ability to have it based upon this. I think this could be restrictive.
I understand. Yes, please.
Just maybe to add, it's a difference if you have lodgers or you really rent rooms, and they might come as single persons and they might bring their own cars. From experience with the STRs, usually people come as a family or couple, whatever, friends in 1 car. Everybody's told how many parking lots off street there are. Why don't you say 1 parking spot per unit? Because usually it's small units and people, I'm just saying that would be maybe.
Okay, all right. No, I understand where you're coming from.
Mr. Chair.
I just think we need to address it just so
Do
that
you
it's.
think do you think it's appropriate if we took that good recommendation, but then we included in here? no on-street parking or, all.
Well, I think
applicable
it
cars shall be off.
No, well, then that would be, I would rather put that in the regulations, that wouldn't be part of the zoning.
Yeah, I don't even think that's an issue,
All that bundle of regulations that we've been going over for months.
but that, it's already,
If we're gonna say no on, no on street parking, then that's. Put it in there, it's not zoning.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, I don't think we need that. There's already no on-street parking for out-of-town folks. So,
Well, right, but
so it's not worth even bothering.
We've got it in our rules as it is, as far as sufficient parking for all guests off street.
Yeah.
I can't remember the exact language.
okay, so we don't think we need to do this.
Or maybe we just.
I don't have really a problem with it. I just thought maybe it was, if we're gonna put it in the table, that's where it belongs.
Yes.
If we don't think we need to put it in the table, then we don't need to.
I'm not saying no, in this case, I would put the onus on the.
If
operator.
anywhere, maybe right underneath the top subject, 1 or 2 family dwelling, 2 per. and it would go there.
Mr. Chair, I think if we add a specific number in this table, we're hamstringing the ZBA then. Because if we're gonna tell the
Right.
ZBA, you have to make sure it's sufficient parking. But yet we have this table that says, well, here's what you need. See how that might compete against each other. So maybe we just.
Okay, I understand that, but how does the ZBA decide whether it's an adequate parking or not?
That's what the ZBA
If we don't
does.
give them a table to use, I mean,
Well, remember how we talked about in the bylaw that we kind of all agreed on, I think. We said that they need to have sufficient parking. We can also put in that the owner needs to include parking management plan, which basically means you provide the drawing of your driveway and explain how all these vehicles are going to fit. So that may be a better way to do it. Just leave it outside of the zoning and
leave it outside.
yeah,
Or-
put it in the
okay.
bylaw, and then the zoning board of appeals can say, okay, provide me some drawing and show me how are all these vehicles gonna fit, and that's easy to, provide.
Or Mr. Chair, realize special permits only apply to non-owner occupied. If you want to put a table, owner occupied parking, short-term rentals, that would be perfectly consistent with what we're talking about tonight.
Well, we want to put some kind of language about parking in the license, not just in the special permit.
Oh, I see. Fair
That
enough.
license that everybody will need, not,
Fair enough.
Yeah,
so
and it
so
probably
parking
doesn't
will be
belong in the zone.
an issue. You know that parking's gonna be an issue, owner or occupied or otherwise.
I think you just
Right.
eliminated the need. for
All right, that's fine. I just,
Perfect.
and I don't have a problem with that.
Yep.
As long as we understand that it'll be addressed elsewhere.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. That's good. So we did the 406 and we did that. Don't need here. We don't need that. So the only other, well, I guess, do we need to, I think we need to put short-term rental on the table of use. But I'm not sure that Rob's language is the way to go.
I think the owner occupied short-term would be in the table of uses, and the accessory use would be the non, well, I'll back up. Hold on. I need to think about that more because I
No,
thought,
that would be backwards.
yeah,
think,
I
Dan,
don't know.
Could you, Dan, do you have a good feel for what the committee's intent is, and could you potentially draft something for them to consider?
I think that's where we were going.
Yeah.
Something.
That's fine.
I think we need accessory use, not, it wouldn't go. in the
But I
table.
think we need to put short-term rental somewhere in the table of use.
But those are primary.
As
use, aren't
opposed to, well, right now, that's like what Rob was
We've got it as accessory.
they? Well, if you look at the bottom of the
saying is
table of uses,
Rob's paperwork that we're looking at just adds some words to the existing single-family dwelling category, as opposed to specifying a separate category for short-term rental. I think short-term rental needs to be listed as a use, and then if it has permitted or special permit on the table, that's up for discussion, but right, but the actual short-term rental needs to be listed in the table of uses.
all right, well, I'll tell you what, let's take a look at what Rob says, and by the time the next meeting goes around, we'll have some more thoughts on that.
Just for a little background, I went with that because, again, that's what Linfield did, and it's already been approved by the Attorney General's office. That's, I mean, that's all they did.
Okay. I know that Saugus has it listed separately, and then it says, and.
Yes.
And,
Yeah,
you know, like permitted in business district, but it's listed and it has a table, it's part of the table.
Yep.
So I just want to make sure that we're covering all the bases relative
you
to,
could do it, well, actually,
if we have to make zoning bylaw changes, let's do them all at once.
I almost feel like you could argue to do both. To close it off in one and open it up on the other.
That's fine. All right, any other issues that need immediate attention to the committee? And no, I'm not hearing any. Marie?
No, I'm good.
Okay, so let's schedule our next meeting.
That was a really quick 2 hours.
Jan 24, it's 14
Is
days.
that good?
I know that we have a letter from Michelle Capano asking if we want to meet on the 23rd.
Oh, the housing, yeah,
Yeah,
it's got a long name.
yeah, whatever, yeah,
Well, okay, so I'm gonna give you my honest opinion on that.
okay.
Nothing that we are talking about relates to anything that committee is talking about.
Okay.
So
It's my
Wayne, it's
opinion, that's
Michelle.
my
I'm
opinion.
gonna have to interject here. There are some overlap and some things that you may need to consider. That's why we would like to meet with you and to go over
Okay.
some of those with your committee. It's not, all this is going to do and what we present is help you with the decisions that you need to make, whether it's the bylaw changes or the regulations, but there are some things that the town needs to achieve as part of its affordable housing initiatives in compliance with the MBTA 3A zoning. So it really would be helpful if we could work collaboratively. I've been in contact with,
I
Rod
totally,
Seiber.
I don't have any objection to working collaboratively, but I guess my concern or I don't understand how short-term rentals relates to affordable housing or the MBTA issue.
so when we meet, we'll
It's
go
a
over
completely
that.
separate thing.
That's true.
So
Separate.
let's try to see if we could set up this meeting with planning board and my new committee that's been established and you all.
When do you have this? When do you have something already scheduled?
No, we don't have anything scheduled. I wanted to.
Is nothing
work
scheduled
with
right
you.
now?
I'm sorry, what was that?
I'm just trying to get some timing in because we are under a time crunch to get stuff
I
done.
understand that,
Don't
and that's what we want to
Want
make sure.
anything
you-
to delay us.
Well,
Yes.
Michelle's talking about the 23rd, correct?
If that's a date that we can work towards, that would be great.
I would be happy to jump in as liaison if you'd want to go that route, and then we meet again ourselves on the 24th.
And if the planning board meets beforehand, then
Well, but Maria, I mean, Michelle, isn't this in collaboration with the planning board, this meeting?
Yes, so it would be a meeting of all three boards together on the 23rd, if that's feasible.
If you could set it up, we'll make sure somebody's there.
Okay, I'll get an email started to confirm the agenda with the chairs, and then I will work with town hall to get the meeting on the calendar for the 23rd.
Okay, thank you.
thanks, Michelle.
And Michelle,
Right.
can you also make it Zoom and in person or Zoom?
Yes, it's
so
gonna
that-
be a combination. We'll try to make it
Perfect, thank you.
hybrid. Yes, absolutely, Marie.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good.
Thank you.
We're looking at the 24th.
As everyone, Marie, is 24th is good to you?
Yeah, it works for me, thanks.
Okay, 24th it is,
It's reserved in Zoom. We're ready to go.
all right. Any other business that we need to address before we adjourn?
I make a motion to adjourn.
Do you want to open it up for questions or feedback?
Oh, yeah, we
if
never
anybody
did
has
that, did we?
questions?
Well, we kind
Public
of
comment?
didn't, I don't think we needed to, but go ahead. Is anyone on the screen want to jump in here before we adjourn?
Going once.
There is
going
another
twice.
page.
Here and
No, there's
hearing
no other
none.
page, I'm sorry.
Hearing none, meeting is adjourned.
We take a vote, yeah?
Oh, aye.
Don't
Aye.
forget to vote.
Aye.
Hearing no objection.
All right, guys. When's the next meeting?
Thank you.
Chair adjourned.
Thanks, Stan, for the help.
You.
That was rough. Oof.